Ethan Carter sat in his office, staring at the latest customer service report. Complaints had skyrocketed. Customers were furious about long wait times, rude agents, and unresolved issues. His company, a nationwide telecom provider with over a dozen call centers, had always prided itself on customer support. But lately, it seemed like the entire system was crumbling. He had confronted his executive team about it, but their answers were vague. They blamed outdated software, staffing shortages, and difficult customers. Ethan wasn't buying it. If something was truly broken, he needed to see it himself. So he made a decision. He would go undercover as a new call center trainee. Disguising himself wasn't hard. He changed his neatly trimmed beard into light stubble, swapped his tailored suits for cheap slacks and a button-up, and wore a pair of thick glasses. No one in the call centers had ever met him in person. Most of them only knew him as a name on corporate emails. A week later, under the alias Ethan Collins, he walked into one of his company's busiest call centers. The moment he stepped inside, he was hit by the overwhelming noise, dozens of agents talking at once, keyboards clacking, phones ringing nonstop. The air felt thick with stress. A supervisor named Greg, a burly man with a permanent frown, greeted him with a half-hearted nod. "You the new guy?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "Great, don't slow us down. Follow me." Greg led him to a cramped desk, handed him a headset, and gestured at the screen. "You'll be handling basic customer complaints today, but listen up, don't waste time on every little problem. If a customer's being annoying, transfer them or end the call. We've got quotas to hit." Ethan frowned. "Wait, so we don't try to fix their issue." Greg let out a short laugh. "Fix it if it's easy. But if they're whining about billing errors or bad service, just act like you're helping and move to the next call. We don't get paid to babysit complainers." Ethan's stomach turned. Was this what his company had become? He put on the headset, hesitantly clicking into the call queue. His first call was an elderly woman struggling with a billing error. She had been overcharged for 3 months straight. "I've called 3 times already," she said, her voice shaky. "They keep saying they'll fix it, but nothing changes." Ethan checked her account. The mistake was obvious. He could fix it in 2 minutes. But before he could, Greg leaned over and pressed a button on his keyboard, disconnecting the call. "Don't waste time," Greg muttered. "Next call." Ethan clenched his jaw. This wasn't a mistake. This was policy. And it was only the beginning. Ethan took a slow breath, steadying himself. The call center hummed around him, keyboards clattering, overlapping voices, the occasional frustrated sigh. But all he could hear was the woman's shaky voice in his head. 3 months, 3 calls, ignored. He forced himself to focus. He had to see more. The next call clicked in. A young man, maybe in his 20s. His internet had been down for a week. He'd called twice already, each time, promised a fix that never came. Ethan pulled up the account, and his stomach sank. No technician had ever been assigned. No notes, just a repeated customer issue unresolved tag. "Sir," Ethan said carefully, "I see the problem. Let me." Greg's hand shot out again. Click, call ended. Ethan turned, anger bubbling. "Why did you do that?" Greg didn't even glance at him. "Not our problem. Next call." Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to demand an explanation. But he wasn't just here to get mad, he was here to see, to understand. So he kept going. Call after call. A mother nearly in tears, because her service had been shut off despite an on-time payment. A small business owner losing clients because his phone line kept dropping. A disabled veteran, struggling to speak, pleading for anyone to help him reset his account. Each time, Ethan saw the same pattern. The system could fix their issues, but agents were either unwilling or forbidden to help. And Greg, He hovered like a vulture, cutting calls short, muttering things like, "Not worth the time. Just tell them they need a new plan. Lie if you have to, just move on." Ethan's blood boiled. This wasn't just neglect. This was deliberate. But it got worse. During lunch, Ethan sat with a few agents, trying to blend in. The break room was cramped, dimly lit, smelling of stale coffee. A woman named Lisa, mid-40s, rubbed her temples. "I had a guy crying on the phone today, begged me to keep his service on, said he needed it for his sick kid's medical appointments." A younger man, Carlos, shook his head. "What do you do?" Lisa sighed. "I tried to push it through, but Greg caught me, said if I pulled that again, I'd lose my bonus." Carlos scoffed. "Bonuses? You mean the ones we never get because they always find a reason to deny them?" Lisa just nodded, defeated. Ethan's fists clenched under the table. His employees weren't just being pushed to ignore customers. They were being punished for trying to help. And Greg, he was thriving in it. Later that afternoon, Ethan overheard Greg bragging to another supervisor. "Corporate doesn't care about customer service," Greg snorted. "They care about numbers. As long as our call times are low and sales are up, they don't ask questions." The other supervisor chuckled. "Yeah, I cut call resolutions by 40% last quarter, got a damn bonus for it." Ethan's stomach churned. His company, his vision had been twisted into this. A machine that chewed up customers and spat them out. A system that rewarded failure. He had seen enough. But then came the moment that pushed him over the edge. It was nearly 6 p.m., almost time to log out. Ethan was exhausted mentally, emotionally. He just needed to get through one more call. It was a woman, her voice strained, on the verge of breaking. "Please," she said. "I've been trying for weeks. My son is in the hospital. I need internet access to talk to his doctors to manage his care. They keep saying they'll fix it, but..." Her voice cracked. Ethan checked her file. Same story, no technician ever sent. No escalation, just empty promises. He felt his chest tighten. "Ma'am, I..." Click. Greg had ended the call. Ethan snapped. He ripped off his headset, stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled. His voice was low but razor sharp. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Greg blinked. "Excuse me." "That woman needed help, and you just..." Ethan's hands clenched. "You just cut her off." Greg rolled his eyes. "Don't be dramatic. We're not running a charity. If she's that desperate, she can go to a coffee shop." Ethan saw red. His company, his values, had been poisoned by people like this. And he wasn't going to let it stand. Not for one more second. He took a deep breath, and then he pulled off his glasses, straightened his posture, and let the weight of who he really was settle into his voice. "My name," he said, "is Ethan Carter. I own this company." A silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Greg's face drained of color. Around the room, agents froze, heads snapping toward him. Ethan let the moment stretch, let the realization sink in. Then he turned back to Greg. "You're fired." The room was frozen. A beat of silence, then another. Greg's mouth opened slightly, like his brain was still trying to process what had just happened. Ethan didn't blink, didn't move, didn't waver. "You're fired," he repeated, slower this time, letting each word land like a hammer. Greg finally snapped out of his daze, his face twisted. Anger, disbelief, panic all crashing together. "You can't be serious." He scoffed, forcing a laugh. "This is a joke, right? You're just some trainee." Ethan stepped forward, no hesitation, no doubt. "I own this company," he said again, "and I just spent the last 2 days watching you destroy it from the inside." Greg's face turned red. His eyes darted around the room. No one, not a single agent, was on his side. Lisa, Carlos, the dozens of employees who had sat silently under his rule. They were staring at Ethan now, wide-eyed, hopeful, waiting. Greg swallowed. Look, I was just following protocol," he stammered. "Corporate wants us to keep call times low, wants us to push sales. I was doing my job." Ethan let out a slow, measured breath. "Your job," he said, voice dangerously calm, "was to help people." A pause. "And you failed." Greg opened his mouth to argue, but Ethan wasn't done. "You lied to customers. You cut calls that could have been solved in minutes. You bullied employees into ignoring people who needed help." He took another step closer. "You didn't just fail, Greg. You chose to fail." Greg clenched his jaw. "It's not just me," he snapped. "This whole system is like this. You think I'm the only one? Every call center runs the same way. Every manager." Ethan's eyes darkened. "Then I'll fix every call center." Greg let out a short, bitter laugh. "You can't just." "Security will escort you out," Ethan cut him off, turning toward the stunned employees. "Pack your things, you're done." Greg stood there, frozen, like he still couldn't believe this was happening. Ethan didn't give him another look. He turned his gaze to the rest of the team. Lisa, Carlos, the dozens of agents who had been forced to do their jobs with one hand tied behind their backs. Everyone in the break room now. The entire floor moved at once. Greg was still standing there, stunned, as 2 security guards arrived. They didn't even have to touch him. He just walked, head down, shoulders hunched, like a man who had finally realized he wasn't as untouchable as he thought. And then he was gone. The break room was packed. Agents stood shoulder to shoulder, some leaning against counters, others perched on tables. The air was heavy, tense, uncertain. Ethan stood in front of them. No disguise now, no alias, just himself. He let the silence sit for a moment. Then he spoke. "I built this company because I believed in service." His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. "I believed that when a customer called, we would listen, that when they had a problem, we would solve it, that when they trusted us with their business, we would earn that trust." His eyes swept the room. "And today, I saw how far we've fallen." A murmur ran through the crowd. Ethan nodded. "I saw customers begging for help and being ignored. I saw employees trying to do the right thing and being punished for it." He exhaled sharply. "And I saw that this isn't just one bad supervisor. It's bigger than that." Lisa shifted in her seat, hesitating before she spoke. "Sir, with all due respect, this is how it's always been." Carlos nodded. "I've been here 3 years. It's always been about quotas, about speed, about pushing sales, not solving problems." A chorus of agreement rippled through the room. Ethan's stomach clenched. He had missed this. For years, he had trusted reports, numbers, metrics. He had believed the high-level data. While down here in the trenches, his company had been rotting. "Not anymore," he said firmly. The room went dead silent. Lisa blinked. "What do you mean?" Ethan's jaw set. "I mean that everything changes today." A beat. Then he started listing. "First, call resolution will be our top priority. No more cutting calls. No more rushing customers off the line. If someone calls, we fix their problem. Period." A few agents exchanged glances. "Second," Ethan continued, "bonuses will be based on customer satisfaction. not speed, not sales quotas. If you go above and beyond for a customer, you'll be rewarded, not punished. Lisa's eyes widened. Carlos let out a quiet "no way" under his breath. Third, Ethan said, we are rethinking management from the ground up. Greg is gone, and if there are any other supervisors pushing this toxic culture, they'll be gone too. A murmur of approval ran through the room. Ethan's voice hardened. And fourth, he let the weight of his next word settle. I will personally visit every single one of our call centers, unannounced, randomly, no more hiding behind reports. I want to know exactly what's happening on the ground at all times. A silence. Then, a slow clap. Lisa. Then another. Carlos. Then the room erupted. Applause, cheers, disbelieving laughter. Ethan felt something tight in his chest loosen. This was what had been missing. Real connection, real leadership. He had let this company run on autopilot for too long. Never again. Starting tomorrow, he said over the noise, we rebuild this company from the inside out. And this time, he would never look away again. The next morning, everything felt different. Ethan walked into the call center not as a disguised trainee, not as an outsider, but as the CEO, and every single person in that room knew it. The floor was quieter than usual, not the tense, fearful silence of the past, but something else, something new, something uncertain. Lisa was the first to approach him. Sir, she hesitated, shifting on her feet. Are you really serious about all of this? Ethan looked her straight in the eyes. Yes. Her shoulders relaxed, just a little, like she wanted to believe him but wasn't sure if she could. Carlos, standing nearby, crossed his arms. They'll fight you, you know, corporate, the other managers. They're not gonna like this. Ethan let out a small, humorless chuckle. I don't care what they like. Carlos blinked. I built this company, Ethan continued, his voice steady. And I let it slip away, that's on me, he exhaled, but I'm taking it back. A pause. Then Lisa smiled just a little. Well, in that case, where do we start? The first changes. Ethan didn't waste time. By noon, every manager in the call center had been pulled into a meeting. Some looked nervous, some looked annoyed, and some, like Greg's old friend, the other toxic supervisor, looked downright furious. Ethan stood at the front of the room, hands in his pockets, scanning their faces. You've all heard the news, he said. Things are changing. A silence. A man near the back, arms crossed, scoffed. With all due respect, sir, you don't understand how this works. There's a reason we do things a certain way. Ethan's eyes locked onto him. Oh, I understand, he said coolly. I spent 2 days living it. The man shifted. The system you've built here, Ethan continued, stepping forward. It's broken, and not by accident you made it this way. A few managers looked away. You've trained employees to ignore problems, to cut corners, to push customers aside. His voice hardened. And you've rewarded it. No one dared to speak. Ethan let the silence stretch before saying, that ends now. He pulled out a folder and set it on the table. In this file, he said, are the names of every supervisor with multiple complaints against them. His gaze swept the room. If your name is in here, you have one chance. One, either you get on board with these changes, or you walk. More silence. Then the man who had scoffed earlier, Greg's friend, stood up. This is ridiculous, he spat. You're going soft. Customers don't respect nice. They respect results. Ethan tilted his head. You mean profits, he corrected. The man's jaw tightened. Ethan gave a short nod. Good, then we understand each other. He gestured toward the door. You can leave. The man froze. What? Leave, Ethan repeated. You don't belong here anymore. A long, tense pause. Then, slowly, the man grabbed his things and stormed out. Ethan turned back to the rest of the room. Anyone else? No one moved. Good, Ethan said. Then let's get to work. Reviving the call center. The changes didn't happen overnight, but they did happen. First, Ethan restructured the entire incentive system. Agents were no longer rewarded for speed, they were rewarded for solving problems. Second, he personally reviewed training materials, rewriting scripts that encouraged deception, ensuring every employee had the tools they needed to actually help customers. Third, he sent out an anonymous survey to every call center in the company asking employees what they needed to do their jobs better. The responses were overwhelming. More support. More time to handle complex cases. More accountability for bad managers. Ethan listened, really listened. And then he made it happen. Lisa and Carlos were promoted trusted leaders who actually cared about their teams. Toxic supervisors were weeded out. Customer service scores started improving. But the real moment of change, it came 3 weeks later. The call that changed everything. Ethan was walking the floor when he heard it. A voice. Shaky, desperate. Please, I just need someone to help me. I don't know what else to do. Ethan stopped in his tracks. Lisa, now a supervisor, was on the call. He watched as she pulled up the customer's account, listened carefully, and then, with quiet confidence, said, I've got you, let's fix this right now. No hesitation. No excuses. No callback later. Just help the way it should have been all along. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second, exhaling slowly. This was why he had built this company. And now, finally, it was back. Epilogue: never again. A month after going undercover, Ethan stood in front of his corporate team. From now on, he announced, I will personally visit a random call center every month. No warning, no heads up. Murmurs spread through the room. Ethan's voice remained firm. I let this company drift too far once, he said. I will never let it happen again. He meant it. And this time, everyone believed him.